What's up, everybody? Welcome to Scientists That Destroy Evolution. Evolution teaches that humans evolved from primitive animals, which evolved from a chemical soup of a mixture of elements, and that evolved from a big explosion where nothing produced everything in the universe 13 billion years ago, long ago and far away. The Bible teaches that humans were created less than 7,000 years ago with the whole planet, which was destroyed by a global flood 4,500 years approximately, forming the modern mountain ranges and the entire fossil record, and that God will one day send his son, Jesus Christ, back to the earth to again judge this planet, but not by water, but by fire. And he will not only remove this planet, but the entire universe. And there will be a new heaven and a new earth. So you can read Revelations for that. Today we're looking at an article that was done by Dr. David Catchpoole, who has a PhD in plant physiology. We're going to show the absurdity that natural selection can be used to produce major changes in animals in order to get one to evolve into the other. That is bizarre. So let's get started here with the article. A little bit about David Catchpoole before we begin. This article is over engineering in nature and evolutionary conundrum. So, who is Dr. David Catchpoole? He's a former CMI, Creation Ministries international speaker, a scientist, a writer. He was promoted to uh, glory on July 2022. So he's probably dead now. I'm assuming that's what that means. This was shortly after an extensive interview with him that appeared in the new July edition of Creation Magazine. It says that he received his bachelor's from a University of Adelaide, a PhD from the University of New England. His PhD basically investigated a high quality animal feed. So it was in plant physiology, it says there. It says he subsequently worked for the Queensland Department of Primary Industries as plant physiologist. He focused primarily on plant nutrition, tropical fruit trees, varietal selection. He also worked as a science educator at James Cook University, which included lecturing in tropical horticulture. He knows a little bit about, how things change, biology, which is what evolution is focused on, getting genetic changes to produce major evolution, macro evolution. David was once a atheistic evolutionist before being challenged to look critically at the problems of evolution and the scientific evidence for creation in the Bible. He went to work full time for Creation Ministries International in Australia over 15 years, serving on the editorial plan of Creation Magazine. So let's get into this article that he wrote. Recently, I encountered this passage in a book about the evolution of crocodilians, crocodiles, alligators, caimans, a conundrum noted in Crocodilian Lungs by Perry. He observed that the lungs are complex and appear very well designed, reminiscent of bird lungs, wondered why they seem to be over engineered. The notion that crocodilians are over engineered was taken up by Colleen Farmer and David Carrier in relation to other attributes. Before the discovery of undirectional airflow, they noted that the apparently competent respiratory system in alligators with such complex musculoskeletal system devoted to maintaining ventilation seemed out of place in a sit and wait predator with a very low metabolic rate and a poor capacity for sustained vigorous terrestrial locomotion. Over engineering in nature is indeed a conundrum for evolution and a serious challenge for evolutionists. They see the problem this way: how and why would natural selection select for an attribute for which there is no survival advantage, given the living conditions and lifestyle of the creature in question? So let me break down what exactly evolution theory is real quick. and what natural selection is. Evolution theory, evolution meaning change, it suggests that, primitive animals in the past over millions of years evolved into the more complex. So that's what evolution theory is basically. Now, natural selection is just where nature, it either gets too hot or cold or windy or watery or icy or whatever and kills everything, like everything, except for these creatures that have a specific attribute, a specific trait, such as a bird, okay, that has a long beak or a short and tough beak, it would be able to access various nuts that the other birds wouldn't be able to, and so they would all die. Or you could take the stupid evolution of the beard theory, which says that the primitive Fight Club monkeys, as they were evolving into humans, were punching each other so much that if you didn't develop a cushion on your face called a beard, you would actually die, and everything with the beard would actually end up overtaking the population. Or you could take the dog, for instance. If you get long hair on a dog, it can better survive in a cold environment, whereas the other ones would just die. So here is what we do, like in natural artificial breeding experiments with dogs. You develop the Chihuahua or the Canardly, because you can hardly tell what it is. You develop all these different kinds of varieties of dogs, right? And then you have that happening. Natural selection is where this happens just naturally. They're just out in nature breeding. And the fact that all of them are dying except the ones that have the right qualities, that is nature basically breeding whatever is alive in that area. Okay, it's killing everything. And then the only ones that are surviving are the ones that have this specific trait. But you'll notice, every single example of natural selection, every single one of them, everyone. I don't care if you're looking at bacteria or you're looking at flies. Flies refuse to become anything other than a fly in any experiment ever produced by man. Okay? Cockroaches are going to survive a nuclear war if it ever takes place, and they will always be a cockroach. I mean, but these guys can't see it, right? Now, here's the thing about the over engineering, what we're talking about in this article. Let's get back to it. Why, if nature is killing all the crocodiles except the ones that can survive better in heat or whatever, why would it over engineer? Why would it give it traits that it doesn't necessarily need? Let's get into more of this. Over engineering in nature is a conundrum for evolution. Complexity, design, overall engineering all imply a master engineer, first of all. There's a fundamental principle at issue here. If something is over engineered, does that not mean that it must have been engineered in the first place? And if it was engineered, does that not imply an engineer who designed and built the creature? I mean, come on. This is ridiculous to claim that these things evolved the level of engineering there. It boggles the mind how stupid this theory is, but how popular it is. It's only control of the education system, propaganda. They got too much money and power. I mean, how else can you explain why such a retarded theory would be taught in universities, public schools, and in prestigious scientific literature? This is complete and utter nonsense. The idea that animals evolved from primitive animals is a theory that belongs in the garbage. Okay, it needs to be in a dumpster fire rolling down a flight of stairs. This is completely absurd. No wonder even evolutionists can't help but use language noting that crocodilian lungs are complex and appear very well designed, and marvel that alligators have such complex musculoskeletal system. Complex design and over engineering all imply a master engineer, and the creator God spoken of in the Bible certainly fits that accolade. Dr. David Catchpoole says had reason to ponder the amazing resilience of our own lungs recently, specifically mine. Only after emergency hospitalization to successfully drain fluid on the lung and administering of anticoagulants to help disperse blood clots in the other lung did the medicos dare to show me the before photos of lung scans. Incredibly, the scan showed one of my lungs compressed into a volume less than half of the normal available space. Together with the clots in the other lung, no wonder I'd have some difficulty breathing. In fact, I marveled that I'd been able to breathe at all. But as one doctor told me, the human body has an amazing inbuilt capacity to compensate for injury and impairment, or as I would put it, I'm very grateful to have been over engineered. So, what's happening here is that the 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 brain and the lungs and everything on basically any animal or plant that you can find is over engineered so that if something goes wrong, it can repair itself and it can use whatever is left, whatever has been destroyed, it can still use that to do its jobs that it was doing before. So it doesn't need the whole uh, like everything. You could start out with 100%, a machine with 100% of its parts, and then you over engineer it. So if it loses 10% of those parts, it can still do all of its necessary work. So it compensates for injury or impairment. That's why it's over engineered. But there's no reason for this level of complexity to, you know, first of all, just the complexity of an alligator itself is mind boggling, and how that would be produced by random mutations is just not anywhere close to being experimental in the laboratory. But second of all, you not only have to make it complex, but overly complex. You have to over engineer it in order to compensate for future injury or impairment. As for the, this is David Catchpoole continuing in this article, he says, as for the compensatory capacity of another key organ in our body, in a feature article for Creation magazine, The Incredible Human Brain, Dr. Peter Line, PhD in neuroscience, focusing on brain electrophysiology, wrote, both computers and brains will malfunction if physically damaged. However, the brain, depending on the nature of the damage, often has enough built in redundancy and neuroplasticity, the ability to reorganize its connections, that other parts of the brain can take over the role of the damaged regions. As an extreme example, consider the removal of the cerebral hemisphere. Essentially, half the brain, as happens in the treatment of some extreme seizure disorders, an operation pioneered by the Croatian neurosurgeon Ben Carson, where this happens at a relatively young age. The long term effects on the cognitive function are often minimal due to amazing neuroplasticity of the brain. On the other hand, if a computer is physically damaged, it cannot repair itself. Since there would not have been any half brain hominids, ape men, how could evolution create the ability of the brain to reconfigure itself when half is removed? So, not only do you have to have evolution, slow changes, evolve all the electrical connections in the brain, which is more electrical connections than there are on the planet. Okay. Like man made electrical connections, soldered connections. There are more connections in one human brain than there are in the entire planet. Not only does that have to evolve by itself, it has to over evolve so that if you lose half your brain, that one half that is left can still do every single thing that the other half was doing. It can take the role of that half of the brain that's been destroyed, just like basically any other body part. So, or, not body part, but that's an example of some certain uh, parts of the body, parts of the anatomy on humans, and then there are other parts on other animals, like we discussed a crocodile, which over engineered. And this over engineering is to compensate for future impairment or injury, and for natural selection to do that, there would be no reason for it to do that. There's no reason for, you know, if you're getting longer hair on a dog because it's getting too cold outside, why would you? I don't know why it would over evolve the complexity of the hair itself. It's just going to evolve it to the point where it can survive. Over engineering is not really something that just nature is going to do. You could possibly perform that by artificial breeding experiments, but nature itself, I don't think it's enough to get something over engineered. So the book on crocodilian evolution went on to say that a solution had now been proposed to the lung over engineering conundrum. Farmer and carrier wondered if there had been strong selection early in the crocodilian lineage for a high aerobic metabolism and speculated these highly evolved systems were a legacy from cursorial ancestors. The discovery that the lungs of alligators have an unidirectional airflow that are so much like birds is a stunning addition in support of the notion that the extinct crocodilian seems over-engineered for their present lifestyle and may have inherited it from a more tachymetabolic ancestry. Though crocodilians are slow moving today, the evolutionist claim is that they descended from fast running ancestors. So, for fast running ancestors, highly evolved lungs, they were necessary at that time. So, they're not over engineered. It's just that the ones in the past, the alligators in the past, are more complex than the alligators today. So, what you see is a reduction of uh, complexity. Sort of let's see. So the evolutionist is going to claim that the reason that the human brain, for instance, you can remove half of it and the other half can perform the function of the half that you remove, the over engineering of the human brain would be that humans in the past were more complex than humans are today. Uh, because that's why you have an over. So it's not like it was over engineered. It's just, we actually needed all of that information at one time. We needed a more complex brain in the past. But notice how that doesn't explain how natural selection can accomplish that, because it's an incredible amount of complexity and we don't see anything in nature producing major changes in animals on the planet today. They say that you have to have deep time and you have to have unknown processes of biology. The process that we have today in biology, in every laboratory experiment and every breeding experiment in the history of agriculture and farming, shows that you can only get minor changes and that they never develop into major changes. You can get a beneficial mutation, but you cannot get a major change from that beneficial mutation. Nature can select certain information within the gene pool, and then produce something that is like more likely to survive, gets it certain traits and abilities that the other, animals within the same kind didn't have, and that it can better survive this environment, but that doesn't change the creature itself. To get these major changes requires deep time, millions of years. Now, we've been able to over several human lifespans, over 100 years now, been doing breeding experiments with bacteria, which have they grow up and get married and have babies like within a couple hours or something. So you can do what would take a nature to do millions of years in a laboratory. You can do it, within a single human lifespan or several human generations. And we've been doing that with all kinds of creatures, and they have very fast reproductive rates, incredibly fast reproduction rates, and multiple offspring at the same time. A lot of animals. Like, so if you can do what it takes nature to do millions of years in a laboratory, then you should be able to replicate, at least in some fashion, a major change. But it's still never been done. So we can't produce that in the laboratory. What is required is deep time. So it's more of a forensic case looking into the the past, long ago and far away, imagining that something would be possible rather than looking at what can actually be demonstrated, and looking at the age of the earth is a different topic, which we won't divert into. So let's keep going with this article. So let's see. They say that the evolutionists would claim that the crocodilians are slow moving today and that they descended from fast running ancestors, which would explain the over engineering. So they'd say that for fast running ancestors, the highly evolved lungs were necessary and therefore they're not over engineered. That's quite an imaginative suggestion, says Dr. David Catchpoole, in case of crocodilian lungs, but does it really answer the over engineering conundrum? No, it simply shifts the problem of origin of complexity and design to an earlier time, so it just puts it puts the problem in the past so that you can't. I mean, if you say that it happened long ago and far away, how are you supposed to disprove that if it's that far away in the past and there's nothing in the present that we can do to replicate it? That's only when we allow for the sake of mental exercise the evolutionary notion that crocodilians could be descended from anything other than crocodilians, for which there is no evidence, and that those same ancestors could have given rise to birds. Furthermore, as an evolutionary strategy of ducking the over-engineering challenge, it is not transferable to over-engineering in nature more broadly. Here are powerful examples that demonstrate this. The odor receptors of the fruit fly, Drosophila melanogaster, have now been discovered to possess the ability to detect unfamiliar chemicals and drugs and explosives. The evolutionary researcher who announced this wrote Drosophila receptors appear surprisingly capable of distinguishing chemicals that they have not evolved to process. So, if this is just a matter of they used to be more complex in the past and now they don't use those traits anymore, but you still have the complexity, you know, that doesn't make any sense for the fruit fly because it's able to detect drugs and explosives and stuff that you know, are you going to say that they needed that in the past? Because then you're just pushing the problem into the past. Sure, maybe you could say that in the past, the fruit fly was more complex than it is today, and that's why it has the ability to detect certain chemicals. But even, the researcher, the evolutionary researcher on this, he said that the receptors on this fruit fly, they appear surprisingly capable of distinguishing chemicals that they have not evolved to process. So he's saying, according to the evolution, of the fruit fly, it never had the ability to um, process these chemicals, not in the past. So, and that's according to, let's see, let's go down to, oh, wait, that's not even necessary. But that was in, let's see, bioinspiration and biomimetics. Article entitled Drophilia Olfactory Receptors as Classifiers from Volatiles from Disparate Real World Applications. Pretty long title for an article, but you can read that if you want. Let's look at another example, the tardigrade. They can survive being subjected to extreme laboratory treatments, radiation, cold temperature, hydrostatic pressure far more severe than any Earth environment, with classic understatement. An evolutionist observed with such an arsenal of adaptations for survival, tardigrades appear to be over engineered. I mean, how can you say that the, a creature on Earth used to need a certain level of complexity in the past and it doesn't have it anymore? And so it's not over engineered. It's just that certain information that it needed in the past is still available in the gene pool. How can you say that if in the past the animals were never exposed to any such environment? Okay. Radiation, cold temperatures, hydrostatic pressure, far more severe than any Earth environment. I mean, the conditions that the tardigrades can survive are not even found on the Earth. So how do they evolve them in the past? when there's not any chance that they could have been exposed to any of those things in the past. Another example is the bacterium Deinococcus radiodurans. Uh, Definitely pronounced that wrong. That's some Greek uh, derision. But bacteria can survive 12 million rads or something of gamma radiation. So whereas natural radiation on Earth is nowhere more than a small fraction of that. It's certainly a mystery how this trait has developed and why it persists, said one evolutionary biologist, dismissing desperate suggestions from fellow evolutionists that it arose elsewhere in the solar system. With these and other creatures having been over engineered for environments that have never faced, or which don't exist naturally anywhere on the Earth, there can only be one verdict about this evolutionary conundrum. It is a conundrum of our own making, born out of a stubborn insistence that evolution must be true. But when we follow where the evidence naturally leads to the creator God of the Bible, the super engineering and other evolutionary conundrums disappear. The reason, you see, the reason that animals have the ability to produce a variety of themselves, the reason that plants and animals are over engineered is because they have a master engineer. They have a creator, you know, super smart guy, okay, who made it all. There's just thousands of little tiny electrical connections in the human eye, and the back human eye connect to the brain. Okay, can you imagine being a electrical engineer and having to perform the job of, getting hundreds of collectional of electrical connections just right within, just like a square inch of space? I mean, it's impossible. So how are things like this even possible? It's because they were created by God. And because of the fact that despite the modern advances of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, no scientists have ever been able to replicate a single cell of anything. I mean, you can look at the most primitive single cell that there is on planet Earth, and it is more complex than a space shuttle, which is the most complex thing that man has ever devised. So, if it's more complex than that, you can't even say that they're primitive. So, it's not like you have primitive animals. It's just some are more complex than the others. And none of the complexity can be replicated by man. So it was created. That's why it's over engineered. To suggest that natural selection is going to over engineer something is absurd, anyways. If you look at natural selection, it just selects, it doesn't create anything. If you have the word Christmas, for crying out loud, you can get hazmat sat out of Christmas, out of the letters that are available in Christmas, but you cannot get queen or zebra from Christmas. So nature is not going to select information that it doesn't have to select from. Okay, it's just selecting from information that's already available. Okay, it's shuffling the information. If you get a two-headed turtle, it's mutant, but it's not ninja, and it's going to survive the next winter. It's not going to survive the next winter because nobody makes a double turtleneck sweater. The point is, it's just a mutation. It's not like an advancement. Okay, you're not getting something other than a turtle. If you get a sheep with an extra leg on the back, that's a mutation. That's harmful. It's the first one that the wolf's going to catch. It is not advantageous for future survival. And those are the examples that we have today. So you cannot get new information from natural selection. It's just selecting from what is already there. In order for something to be over engineered, you have to have an engineer behind the process. For blind chances to produce this requires deep time. It requires the imagination, the fairy tale, okay, long ago and far away, but it doesn't happen in reality. If you can show me an example of where it's happening in reality. I'd like to see that, but there is none. What they say is we have examples of beneficial mutations, we have examples of natural selection, and all these mechanisms which they mix with their deep time scenario. And then only with deep time, only with millions of years, can you actually get this process to do what they're claiming that it did. So you're looking rather into the past rather than what we can be looking at today. Now, they say that they can prove the past, that they can prove that the universe is millions of years old. And if they were to be able to do that, I would say yes, that is a good case for evolution and that these major changes can happen. But the age of the earth is a topic which uh, is it obliterates the theory of evolution because most of the methods that you could use to calculate an age of the earth actually show that it's less than 10,000 years old. But that's another topic we'll get into another time. Thank you for tuning in. Hope this message has blessed you and given you something to think about, maybe that you can use, in the future for people who, need to have their strength, faith, and if they're doubting their faith because of things that they've been taught in school or by some atheist or whatever. So I hope it helps you and blesses you. Thanks for tuning in. God bless America. My name is Christopher Sylvius. Peace be upon you. I'm out.